Okay, so this is a video I've been wanting to make for a while, pretty much ever since the hiatus happened in 2016 when they took a break from the annual release of Assassin's Creed games in order to make Assassin's Creed Origins. Now that these years have passed and we've gotten not only Origins but Odyssey and now soon to be released Valhalla, we kind of have an idea of where Ubisoft want to take the series moving forward. They've been pretty consistent about keeping it as an RPG as opposed to a more traditional Assassin's Creed. So it makes a lot of sense as to why the fan base of Assassin's Creed is so conflicting. You know, like they're like, some people would even call it a very toxic fan base currently, just because there are fans of the current action-heavy, open-world RPG Assassin's Creed games. And then there are people who enjoy the classic, before the hiatus, before 2016, before Origins, classic action-adventure, story-driven, linear, stealth-oriented action-adventure games, right? Like, that's the type of games that they used to be, and now they are currently action open-world RPGs. So naturally, it makes a lot of sense that the fan base would be somewhat divided, you know? In fact, they're very divided. You can't go on a single Assassin's Creed Valhalla gameplay video or story video or anything, really, like, without seeing just a plethora of disappointed fans, so unhappy with how the game is being advertised as a Viking fantasy instead of an assassin fantasy. And it's been that way for what feels like a while now. You know, like the most recent AC game that felt like it was genuinely trying to advertise itself as an Assassin's Creed game was Assassin's Creed Unity. And that was at the beginning of this generation of consoles. That was at the beginning of 2014, I believe, when that game came out. So the series has had an identity crisis for a very long time. The three core pillars of the experience, which are, in the words of the developers, combat, parkour, and stealth. Those three things are the core pillars of this franchise. Basically, the three things that cannot be removed. And they haven't necessarily been removed, but they've been changed so much, and they're no longer the priority of the experience, that long-running fans feel understandably betrayed. You know, they feel like they feel like the series that they got into, the series that they helped make a success, is no longer focused. It's no longer prioritizing them. You know, it doesn't think that they're the main priority. Assassin's Creed fans, the stories that they tell, the assassin Templar conflict, you know, the people that came before, the ancient ones, the ancient civilization, the pieces of Eden, the animus, the modern day storyline, all of those things are kind of being put to the sidelines, right? They're in the foreground now, and what was in the foreground is now in the background, and what was in the background is now in the foreground, right? The mythology stuff, the history part of things are now the most important element of these current RPG heavy Assassin's Creed games, as opposed to what people really care about in Assassin's Creed, you know, which is the Assassin-Templar conflict. I would argue that's the biggest part for most Assassins fans. But they also really like the modern day stuff, and they also really like the pieces of Eden and all those secrets and mysteries that the series has been building up for over 10 years now, are being neglected in the current RPG-heavy Assassin's Creed titles. So the thing is that it's too late at this point, right? Ubisoft can't simply make Valhalla and then next year, or potentially 2 years from now, come out and be like, oh, we're going back to the series roots again. We're doing the Unity thing. We're doing the Assassin's Creed 1 thing. We're going back and looking at the core elements of the series and focusing on those. And we're going to remove all the RPG elements, and we're going to remove the choice to choose your gender. We're going to have a one specific assassin, you know, like you all wanted. They're going to do that. And then the fans of the RPG Assassin's Creeds are going to see it as a downgrade. No matter what you do, no matter how you advertise it, no matter you say you're going back to the series roots, all that good jazz, fans, hardcore Assassin's Creed fans, will be plenty happy with you, but the current fans of the current RPG open world Assassin's Creed games, fans of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, are going to see it as a downgrade. They're going to see it as you taking a step back instead of taking steps forward.
Those mob fools want you gone so they can get back to the way things were. But I know the truth. There's no going back. You've changed things. Forever.
So no matter what you do, you've changed things, right? Like there's no going back at this point. So as Ubisoft are known to do, which is attempt to please everyone, like how often have you seen Ubisoft make decisions based on the attempt to please every possible gamer, right? They try to make games that are good for everyone at all times. And as we all know, if you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. So in order for Ubisoft to have their cake and eat it too, I have a recipe for them that I think will give them exactly that. So as I just said, you can't just get rid of the current RPG-focused Assassin's Creed without pissing off a large portion of your new fan base, right? Who now enjoy Assassin's Creed for how it is and would argue going back to it would be just a de-evolution, you know, like you would be taking steps back instead of taking steps forward. But then Assassin's Creed fans are not happy with you continuing down this road of RPG action-focused gameplay, which is at complete opposition of what they want for Assassin's Creed gameplay. What I'm suggesting is to instead turn the RPG-focused Assassin's Creed games into its own franchise, its own separate entity. So I wouldn't suggest that they go, oh, just take this RPG mythology historical-based series and turn it away from the Assassin's Creed series, but instead make it a part of the Assassin's Creed series. Essentially, turn it into a spin-off series. So it will be still connected to the AC universe. It will still have those stories. It will still have Assassins and Templars, but it will not be a mainline Assassin's Creed game anymore. If it's going to be focused on RPG elements, if it's going to take place in a large open world, if it's not going to focus on those three core pillars of the Assassin's Creed franchise, it shouldn't be called Assassin's Creed, but it can still be connected to that universe. Again, a spin-off franchise. So what would this spin-off franchise be? Well, for the sake of this video, let's just call it Templar's Order, all right? So you got Templar's Order, and then you got Assassin's Creed. Two separate franchises, but they exist within the same universe. They're the same, they are connected to each other. So you'll have the Templar's Order franchise series, which will consist of playing as a Templar, where you can have all of those action RPG-focused systems. But then you have the Assassin's Creed franchise, where you play as an assassin and focus on the linear, story-driven, stealth-oriented action-adventure series, right? So both of them are able to get what they want. You can still please your action RPG fans who enjoy the current Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla Assassin's Creed games, but then you'll also have the AC series pleasing the Assassin's Creed fan base. Think of the opportunity that Ubisoft have in turning this into a Templar-centric franchise. Like, you look at Assassin's Creed Rogue, which was widely accepted by fans, by the way, and it was because you were playing as a Templar, not an assassin. And when I say it was accepted, I mean all of the things that it took away from the assassin formula, right? Your character was no longer wearing a hood. Oh, well, that's okay. He's not an assassin. He's a Templar. Oh, your character is using these super loud and proud weaponry, you know, like he's got that rifle on his back that can fire bombs and like and light people on fire. He's got, his ship has weaponry that you would never see an assassin have, right? Like weapons that just like that they couldn't even get their hands on because they don't have the money to back that, right? The Templars have always been known to side with the people in history who appear to be winning, you know? They always go with the people who seem to be on the winning side, the ones who have the deeper pockets to spend, right? So it makes sense that Templars would have access to all of these crazy weapons, right? Weapons that assassins would never have the opportunity to get their hands on in the first place. So when people saw Shay using weapons like that, using weapons that were louder, more over the top and out in the open, you know, things that are completely against an assassin, that was okay. In fact, it was more than welcome by fans because you were playing as the opposition, you were playing as the antagonists, you were playing as the people against the assassins. So naturally, they would use tactics that were completely against what the assassins do. So as you can see, the RPG system, the current mold of Assassin's Creed, fits the Templar fantasy way better than it fits the Assassin fantasy. So if they were to separate these two things and make them two separate entities, but still a part of the same universe, there'd be so much more like that you could do with it. So much more that fans would be willing to accept. I bet if Eivor, Cassandra, and Alexios were revealed and presented as Templars and advertised as Templars, they would be much more loved characters. People would be so much more on board, especially Assassin's Creed fans would be so much more on board to be playing as a raiding Viking or a mercenary Spartan warrior if they were known to be Templars instead of assassins, because those things are justly opposed to assassination and to being quiet and blending into your surroundings, you know? Being a Viking on a longship and you know, blowing your horn loud and proud, making your presence known to everyone around you, letting you know that you're like, letting them know that you're coming and raiding. Like, that is like completely against the assassin's way. And you can argue like, oh, well, it's an RPG. It's your choice if you want to do that. Well, that's the thing. Assassin's Creed fans don't want that choice. They don't want being an assassin to be an option in Assassin's Creed. They want it to be the core of the experience. They want it to be at the core of the mechanics is you being a badass assassin. You know, they don't want that to be just simply an option. However, if this were a separate franchise, a spin-off franchise, very much like how Metal Gear Solid fans saw Metal Gear Rising, you're not going to be stepping on any toes, basically. When they made Metal Gear Rising, it was made by a completely different studio. It wasn't telling the same story. It wasn't telling the story of Solid Snake. It was telling the story of Raiden. It was telling the story of a side character of that franchise. And it was clearly demonstrated and advertised as a spin-off. This isn't Metal Gear Solid, it's Metal Gear Rising. It's allowed to be over-the-top action. It's allowed to not have too much to do with stealth or espionage and all the other tenets that make up the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Because once again, it's a spin-off. It's not stepping on any toes. It's not pissing any fans off. This way, if they were to show this RPG-heavy open world Assassin's Creed experience as a spin-off franchise with a completely different name, Templar's Order, completely separate from the Assassin's Creed franchise, even AC fans would have something to look forward to. Even AC fans would look at that spin-off series and say, hey, you know, gameplay isn't exactly to my liking, but the story elements, the opportunity to play as a Templar, that's huge. That's two major reasons for Assassin's Creed fans to still be looking forward to the Templar's Order franchise, right? In fact, they have three elements that can get them interested. Number one, just as I said, playing as a Templar is a huge opportunity for an Assassin's Creed fan. They already loved playing as Shay in Assassin's Creed Rogue, and that already opened tons of opportunities of what you can do as the opposing side. Number two, you have the fact that it's an RPG, meaning that you could have the option to play as an assassin. You can get to a certain point in the story where you actually have the choice to remain a Templar or to betray the Templar Order and join the assassins. And then you'll get your hands on a hidden blade. You know, you'll be able to use assassinations. You'll be able to use parkour then. You'll be able to engage in stories and quests that are more tailored towards that play style. And then the third thing would be just the story, right? Like, put aside all of that. Put aside all of those two potential reasons as to why Assassin's Creed fans would still be interested in this. You would just look at it as an opportunity to get more out of the mythos of the Assassin's Creed universe. So there's so much here that can work for Assassin's Creed fans and current fans of the RPG-focused Assassin's Creed titles. So basically, that's mostly what I wanted to say. I know that it's probably unlikely that Ubisoft would do something like this, but I feel like if they want to have their cake and eat it too, if they genuinely want to please everyone, this is the way to do it. You have the Templar's Order franchise focusing on action and focusing on RPG elements and open world experience, and then you'd have the Assassin's Creed franchise more focused on what they did prior to Origins, which is a more linear, story-driven, stealth-oriented action-adventure franchise.